Hi, my name's Meri, and this is Sarah. We're doing Egyptian maniacs.
Egyptian maniacs?
Yeah.
So we know some really interesting facts about mummies and their treatment once they were discovered in the tombs of ancient Egyptian people. Meri, tell me an interesting fact about what happened to mummies when they were picked up by very early Egyptologists and brought over to Europe. What did they do to them?
They made them into kind of dust that for medicine.
Whoa! And what was the dust for?
For people, if they're sick and stuff, it's medicine.
Ugh, do you think it was very good for you?
Well, I think it's disgusting.
And what about, do you remember we were talking about mummy unrolling parties? So when the Victorian explorers would go over to Egypt and bring back loads of mummies from tombs that they raided and robbed, they would have all of these mummies in their houses, and they'd have so many of them. And everyone was really crazy for ancient Egypt in these times. And so they would have invitations, they'd send invitations out saying, come to my mummy unrolling party. And you could go to a party at a posh person's house and they would unroll a mummy, and then a little brown dead body would be left over at the end of it. And what would they do with that little brown dead body?
And they would turn it into dust, what's medicine for them.
Sometimes, but then what else did they use it for, do you remember? They'd grind it up, they'd blend it all up, so it was like a brown powder.
Yeah.
And then they'd use that. Yes, they'd use it for paint. And actually, mummy brown at that time was one of the most popular shades of brown for decorating your home. But it's a little bit gross, isn't it? Mummy brown. I wouldn't fancy that very much. And that paint company, the paint company that first brought out mummy brown, I think they've still got a little chunk of mummy left in their archives for making perfect mummy brown.
Yeah, because they've got a tiny bit there to make paint and like medicine and stuff.
And medicine. And do you think that medicine would have been good for you?
Well, yeah, but I think it's still disgusting.
You think it would have been good for you?
Well, yes.
Do you think it would have made you live like a really long time, like a pharaoh?
Yes.
Like live forever?
Yeah, but I'm not really sure about that. That you could live forever now.
No, I don't think so.
Tomb raiding, robbing and looting occurred in ancient Egyptian times, and the common criminal tomb raider would have been treated very harshly. But even kings and pharaohs and regimes would raid the tombs of their predecessors in order to build new structures with the old materials and reabsorb some of the wealth that was lying untapped in these hidden chambers and tombs. When European explorers and tourists started venturing into Egypt and discovering some of these tombs, they became absolutely fascinated. It made headline news in European newspapers. It's really hard to know just how much stuff was looted and stolen and brought over to Europe and where these treasures are now. But one of the most interesting aspects of this very early Egyptomania is the treatment of mummies. Mummies were brought over en masse. The word mummy actually comes from the Arabic word mummia, which relates to bitumen or pitch. Bitumen can be found in naturally occurring deposits, and it was used by the ancient Egyptians to preserve their bodies for the afterlife. Nowadays we use it for road surfacing. Mummia actually has a very, very long tradition in medicine and was used as a kind of panacea or cure-all. Ancient people also believed in the curative power of death. This kind of corpse medicine had existed in the world for many thousands of years and been practiced by cultures all over the place. In the 12th century, Muslim writers begin specifically talking about using ancient Egyptian mummies as medicine. The Victorians really turned mummies into a form of entertainment, hosting mummy unrolling parties. Once you had unrolled your mummy, there wasn't really much fun to be had with a little dried out, desiccated old leathery body. The enterprising and industrious Victorians ground up the bodies that they had unrolled and used this powder to make paint. It was put into a paint that was known as mummy brown, and it produced a lovely shade of rich red warm brown that was very popular with pre-raphaelite artists. Apparently, when the famous pre-Raphaelite artist Edward Coley Burne-Jones discovered that his mummy brown paint was made from real dead bodies, he buried his tube in his garden. The Egyptians, for the most part, had a real reverence for the dead, and bodies of the deceased were treated very, very carefully, going through the complex process of mummification, which required much time and care by a very dedicated team of professional embalmers. One thing you'll notice if you look very carefully at a well-wrapped ancient Egyptian mummy was that tiny amulets and symbols were wrapped up in the linen bandages when they were prepared for the afterlife. And these symbols and amulets offer protection for the deceased as they enter the afterlife, the duat, and face its many challenges and tribulations. Here's an example of some of the little amulets that were found on ancient Egyptian mummies. We're going to have a go at making some of these today. You can use any materials you can find.
Now we're going to make them, and I'm going to open it up.
Yeah, you can use whatever you want to make your little symbols, but we did happen to buy this little box of Fimo type plasticine, so you can bake this in the oven. And these little amulets that would be wrapped up with the mummies, they were often just about this big, and they'd be placed in the particular part of the body that the protective spell would be useful for. So one of the little amulets would be a scarab beetle. If you remember, we made scarab beetles, and that would be placed over the heart of the mummy. And then you would have other symbols to protect the mummy from other things. You'd have the Eye of Ra or Horus as a protective lookout in the afterlife, and other things like that as well.
So you can use any colour of these.
Any colour of these.
Not even a different colour. You don't have. You can use that, or you don't have to if you don't want to. You can use any colour.
Any colour.
Yeah.
What colour are you going to use, Meri?
I don't really know. Maybe pink.
Maybe pink.
And green.
Pink and green.
And maybe a bit of yellow and red.
Okay, so we're going to get making our amulets, and we'll show you what they look like when we finish.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah. All right then. See you later.
Hi, we've made all of these amulets, like this one. And this one, and this one, and one more, an eye. Can you see it?
And what are we going to do with them now, Meri?
Cook them in the oven. But do you want to see it one more time? Hi. Hi. Hi.
I hope this isn't the one you actually post.
Why not?
Because you just talked in it.
Okay.
What's that one called, Meri? Do you remember?
A chicken. Cheddar pillow.
The Jed pillar is said to be a stylised representation of an early kind of magical talisman or fetish that probably consisted of some sort of plant material bound together. From the very beginning of ancient Egyptian history, the Jed was used to symbolise permanence. Later on, it became associated with the god Osiris and was said to be the god's backbone and represented stability. When a Jed pillar was placed in the linen wrappings of a dead ancient Egyptian person, it represented the body's ability to remain permanent and closely connected the deceased person to Osiris, who was famously revived after his death.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Egyptomaniacs. We enjoyed having you with us today, and we hope to see you again very soon. So goodbye from me, and goodbye
from Meri.
From Meri, and we'll see you again very soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.